Okay, are you all seeing that?
Yes.
Cool, thank you, thank you. So it's a pretty ambitious title. You know, this is my end of year reception. I traditionally do a summer and a winter fundraising reception. But the thought here was that instead of simply doing your typical fundraising reception, that I would sort of have the audacity to put out there a big ambitious goal that I've been talking about for a while, and I know so many of us share. And that goal is guaranteeing housing for all people in the Commonwealth. And I'm going to talk a bit about what we've done, and then talk a little bit about some of the intermediate steps, and then that ultimate goal of making housing a human right, you know, making those words real. And I'm just going to start my stopwatch here because I don't want to go over my time. I want to hear from so many folks. And so to get it started, I'm going to just share a little bit of my own personal story. I grew up, you're looking at the street I grew up in Norwood, Massachusetts. This is Jefferson Drive. That plaque right there, I'm going to zoom in on that in a minute. This was public housing that was built and financed by the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. And, you know, my own story really informs all of my service and really my commitment to this work. My parents divorced when I was 5. It was a bit of a messy breakup. My mother was subsequently hospitalized. I wound up in foster care. I benefited from things like a Head Start program as a kid. And then, of course, everyone who's met me here, you know, I'm a giant. So I ended up getting that attention from football coaches, went on to get a scholarship, and then became a leader in my community. But as I look back on my path through life, I realized, you know, how much I benefited from those government programs, in particular, public housing. And this plaque has always been meaningful to me. I went up and looked through some of the documentation around this project. This was initiated in the late 1940s, and then it was actually built circa 1950, funded by the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. And as I think about my own path through life, starting off in foster care and public housing and that Head Start program, and then going on to college, going on to law school, and now becoming a state rep, you know, I often remember that it was the stability that was provided by this public housing that really formed the basis of everything that happened afterwards. And I really hope that we can get to a place where every kid and every person in the Commonwealth can be guaranteed housing as a human right. So then moving on to my first term in office, I asked to be on the housing committee. I was fortunate enough to be granted that request. We were doing the housing bond bill. This is something that happens about every 5 years on Beacon Hill. And I was fortunate enough to be on the housing committee and the bonding committee. So I got to work very closely on that legislation. I also worked on things like the Jim Brooks Act. I introduced real estate transfer fee legislation. And I won't have a chance to talk about much of it here, but I was also able to do so much community organizing. One of the things I was proud of is working with the MIT grad students to share with them my knowledge. And if you haven't muted, please mute. Hearing a couple people here. And here it is, one of the first major pieces of legislation I was able to work on and vote on. It was the housing bond bill. As you can see, provided funding for a number of programs. And as you can see, those programs are part of that complex web of funding that is used to produce and maintain affordable housing right here in our community. And I just pulled a few photographs out of my phone this morning to share with you some of the projects right here in the district that are supported by that. The next thing I wanted to share, and you know, this isn't to criticize, but it's to really share some of the framework on Beacon Hill when I got there, was some of the discussion around the governor's housing bill. And, you know, this was a bill that ultimately passed the legislature And I was generally supportive of this idea of lowering zoning thresholds for communities that don't support housing. I tend to think that Cambridge and Somerville are like the strongest supporters of housing around the state. And at the same time, we know that there are scores of communities that in any given year won't approve any new multifamily housing. But at the same time, we were told that when this bill was moving forward, there would be no opportunity for debate. There'd be no opportunity for amendments. And that was something that troubled me. I'm going to share with you a little bit of that conversation. You can hear it right here.
I can't hear it, Mike.
We're not getting the sound, Mike. You have to turn on.
Uh-oh. Well, if there's no sound, I'll just tell you what was said. There was this video was from July of 2018. So we're on the end of my first term in office. And we were coming up on the legislative deadline. And there was a question, could we do the governor's bill? And the statement from leadership was we could, but there'll be no opportunity for amendments. There'll be no opportunity for debate. And as you can see in the current slide, that was something I felt strongly about. I felt that on the one hand, while I could see the value in getting all those other communities that aren't like Cambridge and Somerville to support allowing more multifamily housing, at the same time, I felt like we needed to have a comprehensive debate that brought the interests of tenants and the interests of people who are housing insecure directly into the conversation. So I took that stand. It created a bit of, I would say a little bit of controversy, but I was proud of what we ended up doing following that, and I'll get to that here. That brought me up to my second term in office. I got more ambitious. I introduced a housing for all agenda, including legislation that would require multifamily zoning near transit. I introduced the Tenant Protection Act with Rep. Nika Aligardo to lift the ban on rent stabilization. And I introduced a bill that would fund a program of housing for all by taxing very large corporations. And that's just some of the highlights. The package actually included even more bills than that. Here we are at the table. This is now the Housing Committee hearing on the governor's housing bill in this next session. And I was so proud of this hearing. We just heard, I guess you couldn't hear the audio, but we had heard the speaker telling us there could be no debate, there could be no amendments. We were told that real estate lobbyists and municipal lobbyists had made a deal that they would accept the governor's bill and nothing else. And again, my view was we could work with this idea of supporting more housing. That's an important goal. There's a lot behind that, and we could talk about that all night. But at the same time, we couldn't have the conversations dictated to us by lobbyists. And so what you're seeing here is Rep. Aligardo, Councillor Lydia Edwards, Councillor Damali Vido, a number of housing justice organizers at the table critiquing the shortcomings of the governor's bill and calling for a comprehensive bill. We also introduced the Tenant Protection Act. I'm going chronologically here, but the legislation sort of goes in fits and starts. You can see Mayor Wu here joining us at this giant rally that Homes for All and several other groups organized with us back in November. And then after we had a wonderful hearing on the Tenant Protection Act, and while that conversation on a comprehensive housing bill was ongoing, the pandemic struck. And I jumped at the need really to file legislation for an eviction and foreclosure moratorium, and then working with a large coalition of groups and advocates, folks like House Housing Chair Kevin Honan. We introduced a bill, and within about, I don't know, 5 weeks or 6 weeks, we went from a drafted bill to the governor's signature. And I'm sorry to say there were actually some in the real estate industry who until the very last hour were calling on the governor to veto that eviction and foreclosure moratorium, way back before we even had vaccines, when this was, such a emergency, as it still is. But it really goes to show what a fight it was. And as you can see here, the funny thing about this, I was looking through my phone this morning again, and I noticed Ayanna Pressley tweeted this, and you can see I retweeted it 34 seconds later. So that just kind of cracked me up. But you can see over here on the right, this is the Eviction Lab scorecard. They had ranked our eviction foreclosure moratorium as the strongest in the nation. It sounds as if the sound isn't working, so I guess I'll skip over this. This was actually a speech I gave because I wanted to show you the full arc. We went from being told no amendment, no debates, there's an agreement with lobbyists and that's all we can do, to finally having that debate on housing policy. And as a renter and as someone who grew up in public housing, this really meant the world to me, to be able to stand on the floor, to raise the concerns of people experiencing homelessness, to raise the concerns of people facing displacement, and to demand that the approach we take to housing encompass all of those needs. And what I would suggest to you is this actually did help get some results. And I'm certainly not going to take all of the credit, but working in partnership with our progressive colleagues on Beacon Hill, when we ultimately did pass a comprehensive housing bill that required zoning for multifamily housing near transit, it included a tenant opportunity to purchase, it included eviction ceiling provisions. This was by no means everything that I wanted to see in the bill, but I think it showed, and it shows for all of us, I think, the struggle, and the fact that if we're not organizing, if we're not standing up, demanding that our priorities are heard, then legislation can get passed without us. These were real victories, and it was wonderful to see it. Some of you probably know what's coming next. We still do have a Republican governor, and this is a sad headline, and I wanted to highlight this tonight because I don't want us to forget this. This was actually vetoed back in January. You see here, January 14th. This is something I was talking to Rep. Livingstone today. He's leading on the TOPA bill, tenant opportunity to purchase. This is something that we still have to get done. I'm going to try to go really quickly. Obviously, I could talk about housing all night. I did want to highlight the real focus this fall was spending ARPA money. And this is really impressive. I showed you the housing bond bill earlier. That is a 5-year investment in housing. It's as if it's almost as if we did another bond bill on the fly, thanks to the ARPA investments. And so these funds will go a long way. Lessons learned, you can see me out here and you can see Senator Jalen, and we were fighting to extend the eviction moratorium. I think the biggest lesson that I've learned is that we are really strongest when we bring so many voices together. And that's what I hope to do with this meeting tonight. When we bring organizers, activists, the frontline advocates, the folks who are in court fighting evictions, the folks who are working the rental application process, when we bring them together with legislators, and in particular activist legislators, who are willing to, on the one hand, work with leadership when they are willing to address our concerns, or, as I showed a little earlier, willing to stand up when leadership won't address our concerns, that's when we're most powerful. And we've seen examples of that over the past few years, but we've also seen examples of the housing movement being fractured. And so when I get to these suggestions for a Housing for All agenda, I'm really hoping to suggest some common denominator goals that I'm hoping more folks will think about and want to organize around. So I'm nearing the end of my slideshow, but I wanted to run through, again, on the left here, you see recently passed by the legislature some of these important provisions, including provisions that are now in place requiring certain notifications around notice to quit. But then you see some of what's still needed, and I'll highlight this thing right at the top here, and that is maintain expanded rental assistance. You all may have heard there are actually cuts in rental assistance programs due to go into effect next week. And I've been on the phone with House leaders advocating just in the past week for us to take action on that. So wrapping up, I want to suggest a framework for a Housing for All agenda. And I certainly don't approach this as the person with all the answers, but really it's based on an observation that we have so many coalitions, we have so many advocates, we have so many folks involved in all different levels of the housing justice movement, all struggling to fight and make progress on their piece of it. But too often it seems as if when it comes to housing, there's more of an acceptance that the actual end goal isn't going to be in sight. And I contrast that with other areas of policy. I mean, take healthcare. We have by no means reached, utopia, but we at least have the concept of Medicare for all. And there's real legislation, and there's real coalitions, and there's real leaders, and there's a caucus on Beacon Hill. And we at least have held that out there. Similarly with education, we all accept the government will play a central role in providing education to everyone, at least when you reach the age of kindergarten. And of course, we're fighting to expand that to pre-K and to college and grad school. But on healthcare and education, we have those commitments. When it comes to housing, there's too much of an acceptance that we can endure homelessness, we can endure cost burden, we can endure displacement. So the suggested framework that I'm just offering for discussion, as you can see here, some of the prerequisites are we need to elect a governor, a Democrat, a progressive this November. We also have to pass the Fair Share Amendment. When it comes to raising revenue, it strikes me that the Fair Share Amendment is really the centerpiece of the revenue fight this year. So I'm already thinking ahead to the next term. The Fair Share Amendment will fund transportation and education. I'm already thinking, what would a major infusion of funding be for housing, and how could we do that? So I'm thinking about it, and I want to hear people's feedback. You can put it in the chat. We can hear it later. I think about it in terms of three major buckets. The immediate near-term goals, as you can see here, rental assistance, housing first policies, low threshold housing, TOPA, eviction ceiling, right to counsel, etc., transfer fees. Then I'm thinking about building the movement to lift the ban on rent stabilization. We'll hear from Beth Wong in a few minutes about the work we're doing to get ready for the hearing on January 11th. And then finally, the ultimate goal, making housing a human right with a program of guaranteed housing for all people. The same way that your child can be, you sign up for school. If you're a human in Massachusetts, you should be entitled to housing, and the government should play the central role in providing that fundamental right. Finally, I want to leave you with some hope. Victory is possible. It's happening elsewhere. This isn't just pie in the sky. I'm going to start with rent stabilization, and then I'm going to move on to housing for all. These three photos are all just before the pandemic struck. In California, that's Governor Gavin Newsom signing the nation's strongest renter protection law. Then in New York, the Tenant Protection Act passed in June of 2019. And then that wonderful photo on the right, that's the governor of Oregon holding up their statewide rent stabilization law. So this is something that we can do. I'm so glad you've all joined us. I want, my highest ambition in life would be in the next 1 to 3 years for all of us to be part of doing something like this. And next thing I'll say, and I'm truly close to the end, lifting the ban on rent stabilization, that's not the ultimate goal. That is an emergency measure. And we're going to hear from Bill Cunningham in a little bit on the history of rent stabilization. The ultimate goal is housing all people. And the common denominator on that is money. And it's something that far too many advocates, I think, lose sight of. You're in the fight on the granular level, but we've had decades of austerity, and we need to work to overcome that. There are efforts across this country to do that, and they're winning. On the left here, you see San Francisco approves a business tax to fund homeless services, hundreds of millions of dollars annually just in San Francisco being funded by this ballot question campaign. Then on the right, the great Shama Sawant in Seattle, she's been in this back and forth battle for taxing big businesses in Seattle. And so that's really, to me, I think the ultimate idea is getting the very wealthy and the big corporations to pay their fair share so we can raise the money to provide housing for all. Finally, quickly, this is just a suggested timeline of what this current year would look like in the legislature. Mayor Wu has her rent stabilization committee happening. I'm interested in convening further gatherings, certainly more work-oriented than this one, where we can really start to ask that question: what would housing for all look like? What would it cost? How would it function on different levels? So that we can take the housing for all agenda that I've already introduced and hopefully collectively build support around it and reintroduce it, and then build the campaign to ultimately win it. And then the final thing I'll leave you with, we are coming up on the 30-year anniversary of Question 9 that prohibited rent control in Massachusetts. Bill Cunningham's going to tell us a bit about how this has been cyclical in nature. There's always been rent stabilization in times of hardship, to my knowledge. We're going to hear more about it. And so I think this is the timeline I'm hoping we can think about. It won't happen easily. It's going to take a ton of organizing. But my suggestion, my humble suggestion for you this evening is that we would all benefit if we can collectively do more to think about victory and to think about what will it actually take to accomplish these prerequisite and intermediate steps to get to the place where housing is a human right. So with that, thank you for joining me. I did go over, unfortunately. I accidentally messed up my stopwatch. I'm going to recognize elected officials a bit later in the program, but I'm going to just pass the baton to our friend and an incredible leader for the city of Somerville. He's serving his final week after nearly 2 decades leading the city of Somerville. This is Mayor Joe Curtatone. And Mayor Joe was the first mayor in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts to support Rep. Aligardo and I with our bill to lift the statewide ban on rent control. And I really wanted to recognize him for that. I didn't say anything about sustainability in my presentation. As you can tell, I'm already over time, but I wanted to pass it to Joe intentionally because in his new role, he will be a leading advocate for sustainable building practices in the Green New Deal here in Massachusetts. So I'd love for him to tell us a bit more about that and to talk a bit about his work leading the Metro Mayors Coalition on housing issues. So without further ado, the mayor of Somerville, Joe Curtatone.
Thanks, Mike. Hello, everyone. Happy New Year, and I hope you're all well. As I listen, and Mike, thanks for your leadership and your partnership, but as I listened and looked at your presentation and read some of the comments in the chat, I'm reminded how fortunate I've been to work alongside countless numbers like yourselves, advocating and understanding the intersectionality of our work, as I alluded to my new role and trying to help cultivate in the Northeast a green and equitable new economy. It's the intersectionality of climate justice and climate action too, the race for the work and fight for racial and social justice, upward mobility in the economy from those most negatively impacted, housing justice, transportation equity. And, this is about, creating community wealth. This is what we should be doing. It's the intersectionality of that work as a mayor that we've all done that I've loved it, and I'm excited about going where I'm going, but to work with all of you. And I want to thank you all. The only reason the attention to approaching housing as a human right, not a commodity, because of everyone's advocacy and activism, and tying it back to whether we're going to build an equitable and sustainable economy for all, and whether our communities will be stable and our neighborhoods will be thriving for everyone. I just want to comment on a couple of things as well. We can do this. We are losing the housing battle. While in Somerville, we're excited about the new growth and we're building new units on my street, we're losing the housing units where people live, the opportunity to preserve, and we cannot in this Commonwealth and every community, especially in the urban areas, say you have an authentic and genuine opportunity to rent or buy a home here to everyone. The marketplace that the current rules say we have an equal opportunity to participate in, that doesn't work. We can't compete with, really, there's a development front coming in, buying up homes in our street, which is why in Somerville, we work together with activists, stakeholders, advocates, the council to create the Sustainable Neighborhoods Working Group. And there were some points in that we've all been working on and advocating for the whole Commonwealth, the transfer fee, tenants' right of first refusal. Somerville is all in on that, and getting rid of the cap on rent control. It never made any sense for the state to eliminate it, as well here, as we all know. It was driven by landlord associations when it appeared on the ballot in the 1990s. And it's something that is really inhibiting our ability to grow our economy for everyone. And if we don't take this on, the approach that's been outlined by you, Mike, and we've all been fighting for, well, compounded by issues like not having a modern transportation system that is equitable, sustainable for everyone, we're going to isolate poverty more intensely and more remotely. So I hope as we move forward, continue together, and I will be side by side my new role, that we take some of the examples maybe here and across the region, like the 100 homes, which will be 2,000 homes, where Somerville is actively participating with its local CDC, and soon it's really what is gearing up its land trust to go out and buy housing units in our neighborhoods and deed restricted them as permanently affordable. Working to, again, pass the transfer fee, lift the cap on rent control, tying that back to our opportunity for sustainability and climate justice and climate action. Most people who are suffering the worst consequences of the climate crisis don't own their homes. They rent. But I want to go back to this other point that, and I know we all understand this, if we want to really have an impact on the housing crisis, we not only have to build homes, we have to create community wealth. We have to make sure that our growth in Somerville goes back to people, place, and planet, and that happens around the Commonwealth. So one of the things I've left for the new administration, the council has launched a work around the ARC, advance and reinvestment in our community, taking a piece of that new growth, which is in the millions moving forward, and putting it back to your ability to rent or buy a home, fueling our land trust, programs like the 2,000 home programs, making daycare affordable, which I am proud with the incoming Mayor Tatiana Valentine. We put several $1 million towards making public transportation free, as Mayor Wu and others across the Commonwealth is doing, which we've already started here in Somerville, or perhaps sending your child, if they graduate from our schools, to community college for free. We need to do that, but we need to make sure that economy serves all, and the housing piece is critical of that. If people can't genuinely rent or buy a home here, well, our economy will fail. The workforce, the talented workforce, will not be in the neighborhoods they are today. We will not have sustainable action on our climate goals here, and it'll just compound the inequities that already exist here. So I probably went on a minute longer than I wanted to, Mike, but I thank you for your leadership. I look forward to standing side by side with you on this and all the other efforts to, again, invest back in the people, place, and planet.
Well, thank you for that, Mayor Joe. And it was an honor for you to join us, and looking forward to your new role and sustainability. And thanks for being a leader on housing. I promised this wouldn't just be a parade of elected officials, although we have tons of electeds. But in that spirit, I'm now going to kick it to one of my constituents, a leader who helped us get a good census count and then helped us achieve real equitable districts here in the redistricting process. And she's now organizing for January 11th hearing to lift the ban on rent stabilization. And there'll be two bills on the agenda. The bill that Rep. Oligardo and I filed, as well as the bill that Senator Jalen and Rep. Rogers filed. And I wanted to shout out Rep. Rogers. He was here for the first half hour. He had to take off. But without further ado, I'd love to introduce Beth Wong from Cambridge and from so many groups, DSA and others. Beth, take it away.
Hi, everyone. My name is Beth Wong. Thanks for the warm introduction, Mike. I'm a proud constituent in the 26th Middlesex, and I live in Wellington, Harrington, and Cambridge. It's so great to be with all of you, and I'm here just to share a little bit about why this rent control hearing on January 11th in the morning should be on your calendar. So rent control is an essential step towards winning housing for all. It's honestly the only solution that I hear about from normal people. So once when I was writing the red line with Mike from, I think it was a Right to the City Boston housing assembly at Viet 8 in Dorchester. I see Mimi Ramos and Sandra on my screen here. And, when after a really powerful housing assembly, of course, Mike and I were talking about how do we get rent control. And after I stepped off the train, someone followed me off the train and said, "Were you talking about rent control?" That is literally the only time that anyone has ever said, "This is the policy that I want. How do we get it? How do I be a part of this movement?" So that is my number one reason why I believe that rent control is an essential part. It's because it's a policy that normal voters, normal people really truly do want. And so we've made huge strides in the past 5 years. When I moved to Massachusetts just 5 years ago, you literally couldn't even say the phrase rent control in city halls or in the state house. A few legislators very quietly supported rent control. And then in 2019, Housing for All Champions, especially backed by a Right to the City vote, elected a pro-rent control majority to city council. In January of 2020, Homes for All had 60 people testify in favor of rent control at the Housing Committee hearing at the State House. And wow, did we catch the landlord lobby off guard. I remember Mayor Curtatone and Mayor Rivera testified in favor. I remember there were residents all across the state legislators who testified in favor. We had city councilors from Boston and from Somerville and Cambridge and Medford testify in favor of rent control. And today in 2021, the mayor of Boston is the champion for rent control. At least 31 recently elected city councilors in gateway cities went on the record this year in support of rent control. And together, we can make rent control a top priority for the Democratic gubernatorial candidate in 2022. So as you can tell, we are building momentum and it is time to take action. The Tenant Protection Act, which Mike Connolly and Nika Elgardo have led in the State House, H 1440 has its hearing the morning of Tuesday, January 11th, time TBD, but it will be in the late morning, along with COVID housing equity bill that Homes for All is supporting. And so I have 3 asks to you. My first ask is to just write your personal story about why we need rent control. Your story, your voice, your words are the most important piece of how we're going to win rent control. The second is sign up to testify if you're available the morning of Tuesday, January 11th. And then third is if you're not available, just tell your legislator, write them an email, leave them a voice message about why you support lifting the ban on rent control. I believe that we have a pathway to victory. I believe that we can win, but we're going to need your voice and the voices of your neighbors, coworkers, friends, and families. And so I hope to see you on January 11th. Keep in touch with Mike Connolly. I'm sure that he will tell everyone how to sign up to testify. So I hope to see you on January 11th and Happy New Year.
Well, thank you for that, Beth. And thank you for all of your work in so many different areas of policy. I'm going to now pass it to it's been one of the most exciting political campaigns I've ever had an honor to be a part of. And I'm going to introduce her for a quick minute, and I'm talking about soon to be State Senator Lydia Edwards. And I was just so honored to stand with her in her recent election. She earned 95% of the vote here in Cambridge, something unheard of in a competitive election. And I understand why. It has to do with who she's been. This is the pitch that I made on the doors. She's been a public interest attorney. She founded the Office of Housing Stability. She led the effort on Beacon Hill to pass the Domestic Workers Bill of Rights. She went to the Boston City Council and just recently changed the way that they do budgeting to give the city council real power. And now she has, and I will say, election day is actually January 11th. So if you live in Cambridgeport, for the record, you do have to go cast your vote so that we can put her into office. But without further ado, I can't wait until she gets to the state Senate. Lydia Edwards.
Hi, everyone. I hope you are all well. There are so many incredible people on this call that were a part of helping me win this moment and helping to make sure that I'm able to be an advocate in the State House. And so I mean, there's so many of you, I don't want to start naming off people, but just know I am deeply, deeply grateful for this and grateful for this opportunity to advocate and to stand shoulder to shoulder with Rep. Connolly and so many other people who were brave enough to run on rent control before a lot of people were, and stood shoulder to shoulder with people who did, like myself, to help make sure that you can win this way. As Beth just said, that's why we believe we can win, because we just won this way. We said, absolutely, lift the ban. It makes absolute sense. And so that is now a winning narrative in Massachusetts politics, is a huge sign to us that this is the time to strike. This is the time to move as aggressive as possible and to make sure that every single person is on record absolutely doing this. And I want to be very clear, winning Cambridgeport was an incredible moment. I mean, people dismiss it, oh, she's progressive, so on and so forth. The same message worked well enough to win Winthrop as well. Okay, so let's be clear, being for housing stabilization, being for people being able to have, saying that housing is a human right, that we should lift the ban, these are winning messages. And I say this to all the folks who are on here who are concerned about possibly this being too much for folks to handle, their heads will explode, so on and so forth. We saw what happened when you step boldly into policies that protect and push for working middle class families and poor people to have a home. You boldly step, you will win. So I just want to say that, and I want to thank everybody who stepped with me. There's senators on here, future colleagues, and the State House, of course, and Rep. Connolly. I do want to add to the agenda and the conversation a couple points. Everything that Representative Connolly said, everything that Beth Wong said, I want to add in other points that we also need to make sure that is part of the housing stabilization toolkit. One is removing the stigma of ever having been evicted. It is a stigma. It is an unnecessary one. It impacts people's credit for the rest of their life. It impacts, in some cases, they ask if on job applications, they are asking people, have you been evicted? As though that's an indication of anything except at one point in your life, a landlord beat you in court. Okay, that's about it. You don't know if that person just didn't have the money. You don't know anything. But I do want you to know, statistically in Massachusetts, I've said this before, Black women are 2.5 more times to be offered the eviction as the way out versus other races and other people. So they're not even given the soft landing. And you have to understand that has to do a lot with the fact that we don't have legal services everywhere in the entire state. That's why right to counsel, I hope, is part of our entire conversation when it comes to housing rights and stabilization. B, eviction ceiling, which is the Homes Act, a bill I helped to write and I'm pushing for still, which is going to help people move on with their life. It is the civil counter, or civil complement, I should say, to what we've done with Corey reform. Okay, it's basically saying there's a certain point where what happened in the past is no longer relevant to who you are as a renter, as a homeowner, it's just not relevant. And so we want to make sure that we acknowledge that. We remove scarlet letters here in Massachusetts. So again, going back to right to counsel, we want that on there. And this is partly maybe the legal services attorney in me. We also have eviction ceiling. And then there comes to a point where we will have, and we will, there's no question, have the resources with additional federal funds. Hopefully fair share tax passes, but also we're looking towards taxing additional to get additional resources. But you can have all the money and you can have also opportunities to build. But what we've seen in Boston and what we've seen in Somerville and Cambridge, if you do not plan with equity and racial justice, if your zoning does not reflect that, it will undo everything that you have just fought for. So it is not enough to produce the housing for a middle class and assume that it would automatically be racial integrated. Let's not be that naive. Let's not assume in any way, shape, or form that more units, whether they're affordable or not, means that more poor people, working class families will have access to them in equal ways. That there are barriers that still exist, whether it's homophobia, transphobia, racism, classism, will still be barriers unless we are intentional in how we also allocate our resources. And that's why we did pass the affirmatively for housing law in Boston. We're the first city to do that, to say that we must remove obstacles to opportunity. That's what it says in the law, and take meaningful actions to do so. That's in our zoning code. I would like to continue that conversation at the state level. So when our money flows, or when our zoning or when our planning goes on, what standard are we holding ourselves to beyond just don't discriminate? That's not good enough. That's not good enough. That's not what affirmatively furthering for housing does. It's not enough to say we just won't do something. You must prescribe what we must do with an equitable lens that is based in racial, gender justice, and so many other, and environmental justice. And we can do that. So this is not taking away at all. I know Rep Connolly, this is not taking away from anything that you just suggested. This is adding more tools in the toolbox and making sure that we don't squander this wonderful opportunity. So let's add to the things, right to counsel, eviction ceiling, AFFH, and planning with an equity lens that is required by law at the state level. So that's me. I'm excited to get in the fight with you. Look at these guns. I'm ready to go. Let's go. Let's go. I'm very excited, and thank you all for all the work you did. And please vote on January 11th. I am not the senator-elect. I'm the Democratic nominee for this position. Okay. I won the primary, and the final election is January 11th. So those of you who live in the first Suffolk and Middlesex, still soon to be third Suffolk, please vote. So thank you so much, and thank you for giving me some time, Rep.
Oh, thank you, I don't know what to call you, Counselor
Lydia.
Lydia. Thank you, Lydia. Looking forward to encouraging everyone to vote in a couple of weeks. We've got so many great folks here. I'm going to kick it to one of Lydia's future colleagues, State Senator Jamie Eldridge. Rep Nika Alagardo is on deck, and we're going to start trying to move through this so you can hear from more folks. But thank you, Lydia. And I just want to say, by way of introduction, I got my start as an activist at Occupy Boston. Back then, Jamie Eldridge, I don't know if you were a senator then or a state rep, you came down there and gave a speech, and I saw you talk to us dirty hippies in the park, if you will. And I was like, wow, he's in that building. It's cool that we're in this park, but we need to get into that building to actually change the laws. And so you were doing it then. You've always been a hero to me. It's an honor to have you here tonight. The great senator from Acton, Jamie Eldridge.
Great. Thank you so much, Mike. And that is an awesome memory. I think I was in my first term as a senator. And, to your point, bringing activists, and I'm just seeing so many leaders here at this organizing meeting that Mike has put together on housing. And Mike, to see you in the building and to work with you and have you propose these bills is incredibly powerful. And I might be one of the rare people here that's not from the Cambridge, Boston, Somerville area. I represent a Metro West district. And I really just want to say thank you so much for what you're doing organizing, because it's had an impact across the state. And the only story I'll tell from my district, which has just been devastating, and it's become a little bit more well-known, but there's a neighborhood of 120 working class families in Devon's Crest. It's actually veterans. It was veterans housing for working class families by Fort Devens. And a developer out of New Hampshire purchased the property, and within a month sent eviction notices to about 40 families. So we're battling that out. But one of the things that's come up at the community meetings is TOPAs, the Tenant Opportunity Protection Act. I really appreciate your leadership on that. But also, and I represent 14 communities, is how are we going to have the revenue to realistically help communities build affordable housing that we want, to Lydia Edwards' point. And so your leadership on the real estate transfer tax, I really appreciate. I think that's got solid momentum. I'm proud to file the HERO bill with Representative Elagardo and you, that the Housing Environment Revenue Opportunities Act, that would double the deeds excise fee and raise about $300 million for climate resiliency and affordable housing. So sort of bringing together two interests to advance public policy and revenue. Because if we don't have that dedicated revenue, and I appreciate what you've been fighting for in the ARPA budget and in the bond bill, the reality is we're not going to be able to build very much affordable housing. So if we can just build upon the power from tonight's meeting around housing for all, that's how we're going to get there. I'm incredibly excited to hopefully soon be serving with Lydia, that kind of voice on Beacon Hill and that kind of intelligence and passion. I think that's going to be a game changer as well. So thank you so much for all you've done. I'm honored to be part of tonight's event, and let's get some of these things done next year before the end of the session. Thanks so much, and great to be here, everyone. It's a real honor.
Well, thank you, Senator, and I'm proud to be working with you and our next speaker, Rep. Elagardo, on our public banking bill. We're joined by Nancy Ryan, who has been such an incredible leader on that bill as an advocate this year. And I'm proud to be working with you and Nika on so many different bills. And Rep. Elagardo has really been one of my best friends in the House of Representatives. We filed the bill to lift the statewide ban. We're working to pass a public bank. We're working to expand voting rights for immigrants in municipal elections and so many other things. So without further ado, I know her time is limited. Rep. Nika Elagardo.
Thank you, Mike. And it's very exciting to see all the faces and hear the voices. You know, if you look, I was chatting with someone who I won't call out, but they said, what, 114 people on a holiday week have shown up? And it shows the momentum that the movement has for housing for all, but it also shows the importance of Rep. Connolly's of activists to bring together. And so I want to thank you, Mike, for that, for 100% of the time, lifting us all up as you lift up. And we do that for each other, I know, but, you know, credit where credit is due. There's nobody in the State House that brings together housing activists at the level that you do. And so it's fun and an honor for me to be able to partner with you on so many things that we've mentioned and so many things that we haven't. And, you know, with Lydia and Jamie speaking, it just gives you a sense. And I've got 10 housing bills, yeah, and there are people that aren't on this call that could give similar speeches. And it shows that housing for all can't really be framed as just an amalgamation of actions that we're taking at hearings and constantly reacting to a legislative schedule. What Mike is presenting here is more than just getting us ready for a legislative schedule. It's making that the baseline for a broader movement where we're really understanding what would it take to house every resident in the Commonwealth. And yes, we need revenue, but we can't cash our way out of this problem. And yes, we need supply, but as Lydia spoke to, it has to be equitable, it has to be sustainable, you know, with regards to climate resiliency, as well as disability access and transit equity. And what Lydia has done with inclusionary zoning is short of incredible, just because she's helped Mike and I and Jamie too, and I see Will and I see Quentin and others. We're all about mainstreaming the so-called radical concepts of justice, just that people should be able to live in a safe home and have enough money and food to eat. Like these are not radical concepts. So we refuse to accept that along with the rest of you. And Lydia has mainstreamed this idea that inclusionary development and inclusionary zoning both need to include race equity as well as income equity in the codification of how we do building. And that's just the basic concept, right? that has blown folks away. And so she's led on that in developments in her district, one in particular, in her city council district. And I'm very excited to have her in the Senate to continue that work and other things that she mentioned. And then Jamie's been working on this stuff since before Mike and I got here, right? And he's brought me on. He brought me onto the HERO bill along with some of the advocates. And so this mentoring and educating of the new ones, and then we come and we become leaders and keeping that generation going. It's really a powerful concept that we have to take in here and not just get into the nitty gritty of the transactions, which is necessary but insufficient for building a movement that truly houses everyone. If we have revenue, if we have sustainable supply, even if we have a robust set of tenant protections, none of that alone, or to even taken together, will create the housing that we need. We need a data-driven approach to expanding the conception of public and affordable housing. Housing needs to be a public good, the way that education is a public good, the way that we're trying to make healthcare a public good in Massachusetts, the way that parks are a public good, the way that we have public spaces. Public housing, the way that we think about that right now, is grounded in a 70s and 80s federal concept of charity and sort of saving poor people. That's a fallacy. The people who are living in affordable housing, whether it's deemed public or not, it is public if public dollars are investing in it. And those residents are investors, and they deserve a return on their investment. Because whether you're talking about communities like the one that Jamie described in the Acton area, or Mildred C. Haley Public Housing Development in my district, these are folks that for 10, 20, 30, 40 years have developed the culture and economic prosperity of the land that they're living on. And on their watch, it's become some of the most valuable land in the country. And a lot of that is state-owned land. And there's over $1 billion of it, and we don't use the land well to create and develop affordable housing. And there's all kinds of barriers to that. So we need to train and teach our legislators and our constituents, all of us together, what a comprehensive program for affordable housing looks like. But most importantly, to understand that it's an investment and that it is deserved. In the Black community, we talk a lot about reparations, not just being saying sorry for something you did wrong and giving me something for that. It's really a compensation for a stealing, a taking. We talk about that with our Indigenous communities. There was a taking on the investments that we've all made and that every resident of the Commonwealth has made. And that return on investment is going elsewhere. It's going to large scale corporate development. It's going to other things. And so when we think about housing for all, let's be mindful that when we show up for the hearings, we're not just trying to get bills passed. We're shifting a culture of what we think affordable housing even is. And I'll just end with a conversation I was just referencing with Joe Kreisberg, who's on the call, the head of the MACDC. After I was elected, before I was sworn in, I sat down with him and I said, Joe, I need to start learning the data. How many units do we need to house everyone? And he said, well, we're working on this data that says, one in 5 people who need affordable housing have it. We're trying to get that to 1 in 4. And I said, we need to get that to 4 in 4. What are we thinking? And he said to me, well, that's great thinking. Will the legislature abide that thinking? Because we need the legislature to think that it's unacceptable for anyone to go without affordable and sustainable housing. So the stories that we're hearing tonight are the work of Mike, myself, and the legislators, but they're primarily the work of the rest of you on this call who have for decades worked to shift the culture so that legislators know this is a mainstream idea. So keep up the good work. We're going to keep doing the work to provide the frameworks with your help. We might even have tools and videos that we can use going forward that help people understand these concepts. But it's not just about getting the bills passed. That's just the beginning. The work you're doing on the ground to help people understand the impact of these bills and the gaps that are left to be filled in, that's what's going to make sure that we have housing justice in Massachusetts that leads the Commonwealth. So thanks again, Mike, for having me. And I'm just so proud to be part of this group and so excited that it's always growing. and so grateful to you for your organizing ability.
Oh, well, thank you for that, Representative. It's such an honor to serve with you, and looking forward to big things in the new year. And it's coming up on 7. I feel like I have to stretch this out a little bit longer. I want to do some quick housekeeping, and then we're going to hear from a couple more organizers. We're going to hear from some elected officials. My campaign treasurer, Frank Giarratana, did just put the donate link in the chat. Again, we're really trying to do 2 things at once here. This is my end of year reception to raise funds for my own reelection next year. And I'm so grateful for so many folks on the call who have already contributed to that. But this is really how I wanted to do an end of year reception. I didn't want to just have crab cakes and wine. I wanted to gather with all of you and talk about what really gets me excited, and that is passing housing legislation on Beacon Hill and doing the work in our community. Next, I'm going to shout out, and let me know if I missed you, just some of the elected officials who are here. We're going to hear from more of them for anyone who can continue on the call for another 15 or 20 minutes. If people have to drop off, understandable. And then after that, we're going to also hear from some advocates and some organizers. I'm going to go to my constituent, Bill Cunningham, next, who is going to give us a super brief history of rent stabilization in Massachusetts. And I really wanted him to be here. I asked him to come because the story didn't start in 1970. And with all of your help, it's not going to end in 1994. But before I do, so many folks have joined us, and this is officially a political event. I have not hired any political staff at this point, so it's self-organized. So thank you for bearing with me through any technical difficulties or agenda concerns. I do want to hire an additional staffer to do, organizing in the community and support my reelection. And so you can, if you haven't done so already, I would humbly appreciate any contributions toward doing that. So before we get to Bill, I want to shout out Representative Dave Rogers, who was here for the first half hour. He also has legislation to lift the statewide ban that will be heard on January 11th. I want to shout out the Somerville City Council President, Matthew McLaughlin, who joined us tonight. He had to go take care of his young kid, so he just dropped off the call. But was so grateful he could join us. I want to thank our Ward 2 City Councilor in Somerville, JT Scott, for joining us. He's been another incredible champion on the Somerville City Council. I'm hoping we'll hear in a moment from our Ward 3 City Councilor in Somerville, Ben Ewan-Campen. I was texting Ben 1 week ago tonight, and I was like, what do you think? If I organize something on Zoom next week, would people show up? And Ben said, yeah, I think so. And I was like, all right, if Ben's in, I think we can do it. Thank you, Ben, for giving me the courage to do it. I want to shout out Patty Nolan, longtime friend, city councilor here in the city of Cambridge. She's with us. I want to shout out the Somerville at-large city councilor-elect, Jake Wilson. I want to shout out my colleague in the House of Representatives. I hope he can stick on the call for a few more minutes to say a few words. That would be Representative Steve Owens of Watertown. I'm going to shout out Burhan Azim, the new city councilor-elect here from Cambridge. Thank you to, again, Joe Maggie. I hope I pronounced that right. He is a city councilor in Burlington, Vermont. If folks stick around, I'd love for him to hopefully say hello. Thank you to, how could I have not mentioned her yet, State Senator Pat Jalen, another consummate leader on housing justice issues, whether it's the housing equity bill, whether it's lifting the statewide ban on rent control, and so many other issues. Senator Jalen is our champion on Beacon Hill. I want to shout out Raul Fernandez, an elected official from Brookline. You saw that photo of Michelle Wu earlier. That was Raul in the background with us on Beacon Hill 2 years ago. I'm hoping we'll hear from one of my longtime friends and mentors, Cambridge City Councilor Quentin Zondervan, who's here this evening. We have Somerville City Councilor at Large Will Mba, who's joined us this evening. Thank you, Will. We have Somerville City Councilor Jesse Klingon. We could pass some legislation. We have a lot of legislators here. We have really a hero for working families. I call him Mr. Somerville. Jesse Klingon is here. I mentioned earlier, we have Rep. Ruth Buffalo from Fargo, North Dakota. It's such an honor that she logged in, and I'm hoping if folks can stick around, I'd love to hear a bit about the perspective that she brings to this conversation. We're also going to be hearing from Nicole with Cass, who's done some incredible organizing. And if I missed you again, this is self-organized. So just text me or let me know in the chat. But that's some of the housekeeping. Everyone is encouraged and welcome to make contributions. I'm going to try to get us through over the next 15 minutes or so some of the other incredible speakers who were willing to come chat with you. And last but not least, I almost forgot him, another city councilor from Somerville, Willie Burnley Jr. He will be getting sworn in next week. I was so proud to support Willie in his election. And he is already actively reaching out to me to say, how can we partner to lift the ban and have housing for all? I'm so excited for it. Jake Wilson, did I mention you, Jake? I hope so. City Councilor at Large, Jake Wilson. A lot of folks here, I'm really grateful. Okay, with that housekeeping out of the way, if folks, I'm gonna say 7:30, I'm ending it. So I'm gonna take it from now to 7:30. If you can stick around, please do. If you can't, we'll understand. So we're gonna try to go quick. We're gonna try to hear from some more incredible folks, but I wanna kick it to Bill Cunningham, and I'd love him to give us just a quick overview of the long history of stabilizing rents. Thank you, Bill, for your support, your encouragement. I know we talked about rent control 10 years ago, and at that point you couldn't say the words in politics, and now you can. And we've seen that with Joe Curtatone, we've seen that with Michelle Wu. So thank you for joining us, Bill.
Well, thanks for having me. I assume you can hear what I'm saying. This is going to be like a lecture because I got to run through a lot of years really, really quickly. But I do want to start out by saying what's encouraging here is that people have the belief that they can do this, right? And I can tell you for sure that in the late 60s and 1970, we were told by many, many people that we could not actually get rent control, for example, in Cambridge. And in fact, there were lots of obstacles to our doing so. But ever since then, I always hear, you can't do that, you can't do that, you can't do that, including that you can't say the word rent control. And now we're saying it. So in the last 100 years, we've had three distinct eras of rent control in this country and in this state. The first era was after World War I, not during, roughly from 1920 to 1927 in Massachusetts. The second era of rent control was during World War II and the post-war period up until 1956. And the third era began in the late 60s. And this era is different in that rent control emerges in different locations, certain places, here and there, scattered across the state of the country as the case may be. The previous two eras were eras of widespread rent control, almost universal, but not now. In Massachusetts, the third era was law between 1970 and the final phase out of rent control in 1996. In a sense, this third era continues with us today. Rent control is popping up here and there around the country again, and it's now an issue again in Massachusetts. So how did these reforms come about? In the early 1920s, there were actually tenant organizations all over Massachusetts by 1921. Labor unions organized most or even all of these. The organized tenants were clearly pro-rent control, but so was Governor Calvin Coolidge, who was the sponsor of the first state rent control laws in Massachusetts. The laws of the 1920s, both here and in New York and other states, largely ended when the housing boom of the 20s gave way to the beginning of the Depression. And in the Depression, it was the real estate leaders who were organizing, trying to get their fellow landlords not to lower rents. Well, clearly in a situation like that, rent control was not on the agenda. But tenant organizing shifted to more militant actions, eviction blockades, moving people back into their homes after eviction, rent strikes. And this period was often led by radicals and communists. A full year after the United States entered World War II, Washington imposed national rent control, beginning the second phase of second era of rent control. Most other countries had done so long before this. After World War II, the organizations that led the movement to retain rent control in Massachusetts and to build public housing. Remember that Massachusetts is one of the few states that had its own public housing program in addition to the federal. These were led by labor and veterans organizations. Rent control in that era was backed by the most conservative forces in society. The AFL, the American Legion, the Catholic Archdiocese, they all, for various reasons, strongly, not just on the book, but strongly backed rent control. However, in 1955, rent control was eliminated almost everywhere in the country except New York. And the very next year, urban renewal and highway programs, not having rent control in the way, went full throttle around the country, bulldozing and displacing millions of people from the communities, basically certain ethnic groups and African-American communities primarily. After several of years of this, and in the context of a vast social movement sparked by the Afro-American liberation movement, demands for rent control rose again. In the late 1960s, tenants were organized this time in new types of community organization, not connected with labor or with veterans. Labor was still there backing us, but they played a secondary role. So to sum it up, rent control is, as an earlier speaker mentioned, probably more than one, not really a radical, but a fairly normal thing, not only in the world, but right here in Massachusetts. For 45 of the 80 years between 1920 and 2000, there was rent control on the books in Massachusetts. During those years, the issue of rent control and housing transcended party lines. There were people in the major parties on both sides of the issue during that whole period. And surprise to those who theorize that rent control discourages new construction, the biggest housing booms and the largest increases in home ownership percentage in American history took place during these rent control eras. So I'm done.
Sorry. I was trying to unmute myself. I think I muted you. Thank you, Bill. That was amazing. Sorry, technical glitch here. But yeah, the takeaways there are so incredible, that this isn't a new idea, that there's been strong housing production in times of rent stabilization, that it's been a Republican idea, it's been a conservative idea at different points in time. And I think this is really valuable, and I'm hoping to learn a lot more of this history so that I can try to persuade more of our colleagues. And, as I explain it to people, with our bill, the Tenant Protection Act, we're not trying to be prescriptive. We simply approach folks and say, at present, our city officials are virtually powerless to actually intervene during obscene rent hikes or widespread displacement. And what we're really asking our colleagues on Beacon Hill to support is lifting this statewide ban so that our city officials can bring everyone to the table. And I feel like that's a key message. That does mean, we will be bringing landlords, we'll be bringing homeowners, we'll be bringing all stakeholders along with renters and tenants to craft policies that work for everyone. And I think understanding this history is so valuable. I'm going to, and I hope I'm trying to get to everyone. I hope you'll all indulge us. I really want to hear from Rep. Ruth Buffalo, who has logged in and is joining us all the way from Fargo, North Dakota. It's truly an honor to have you join us. I'd love to hear more about your service and the perspective you're bringing to this issue. Rep. Buffalo.
Yes, thank you. It's an honor to be in this virtual space with you. I am still, I'm halfway through my first term. So we serve 4-year terms here in Fargo or in North Dakota. We're a very sliver of representation. I am up for re-election this November. So it's an honor to be here and learn some of the good work that you're doing, learn about and hear about it. We did try to introduced a package of bills in our last session, which was last winter. We also meet every other year. So we're really a different, we're a different state. We're in a trifecta. It's a majority is held by the Republican Party for our governor, the Senate and the House. But unfortunately, our rent control bills, like putting a cap on rent late fees, also died. So I'm still wanting to carry that work forward and just hoping to learn more and exchange notes with you and continue to support the good work that everybody's doing. So thank you so much. And I hope everybody's staying warm. It's below zero, below freezing here, like -12, but really -20. So but so we're definitely concerned with our unhoused relatives and finding ways to support long-term change, sustainability versus, just putting a Band-Aid on things. So thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Representative. It's an honor to have you join us, and looking forward to building that solidarity from here to North Dakota. I'm going to next call on my House colleague. I know he's been patient, and that's Representative Steve Owens. He is the successor to Representative John Hecht, and I can say that Steve has met that standard, and that's a hard standard to meet. And so I'm so delighted, Representative, that you're here this evening in support of this goal.
Well, thanks so much, Mike. I really appreciate that, your kind words. And I know when I look out on the, well, it was 5 pages of Zoom screen, and I see some of my favorite colleagues, some of my favorite members of the Cambridge City Council, some of my favorite constituents. I know I'm in the right place. So thank you for inviting me here today, and thank you for really, for those of you who don't know me, this is my first term, and I want to thank Mike for his leadership and his friendship, really, over the past 11 months. So I won't take up too much time, because really there's Rep. Connolly and other folks, Mayor and Rep. Elaguardo have all said how important this is, and it's really just preaching to the choir. But what I really want to focus on is how important housing policy is to not just keeping people in their homes, which is obviously really the most important thing, but all the other things that we want to accomplish as well, right? Housing policy is climate policy, and not just in the way that we think, not just in the way of energy efficiency, energy efficient housing. I mean, we have here in Cambridge, we have a passive house affordable housing development over on Concord Ave. We've proved that you can do energy efficient affordable housing here, but also that people need to be able to live near where they work, right? And if they can't, they'll be commuting long distances, putting out more emissions out of their tailpipes. And we need to have housing for all incomes, not just the high-tech lab jobs, which are the jobs that are the kinds of jobs that are becoming more and more prevalent here in my district and in Rep. Connolly's. We need jobs for support staff. I mean, we saw what happened in the San Francisco Bay Area, where the housing market just completely hollowed out, and anybody who worked in a support capacity had to live hours away from where their jobs are. So housing policy is is climate policy, and we really need to make sure that we have the ability for people to live near where their jobs are. But also, housing is public health policy. You know, we've got another variant. We're asking people to isolate. If people are unhoused, where are they going to isolate, or underhoused? Where are they going to isolate? So we really need to make sure that that we keep that in mind as we're going forward, and also the toll that being unhoused takes on people's mental and physical health. We know how much of our public safety infrastructure is dedicated to dealing with folks who are having those sorts of mental health issues as well. So housing really encapsulates all the things that we want to do, and it's just so important that Rep. Connolly's leadership is just so important on this, and I really am so happy to be a part of it, and great to be here with everybody.
Well, thank you for that, Representative. I'm so glad that you're part of the Cambridge delegation and that you're also representing Watertown in such tremendous capacity. All right, so moving right along, I'm going to try to talk less. I'm hoping we can squeeze another 5 or 6 voices in the next 10 minutes or so. But one of the first people I thought of when I organized this is Nicole, who has just done such an incredible job organizing for CAS. She had invited me to an event just a week ago to stand with some of my constituents. Senator Jalen and other electeds are doing so as well. And she just won at least a near-term victory. And so I'd love, Nicole, if you could share a bit more about all the exciting work you're doing to really help tenants have a voice in the political process.
Yeah, thanks so much, Mike. Hi, everyone. My name is Nicole Eichbrett, and I'm a queer Asian American organizer, former State House staffer, renter, and constituent of Mike's in East Somerville. And it's so fantastic to be in community with you all tonight. And I really thank Mike for bringing us together. So some of you may know my paid work as the Director of Community Organizing at the Community Action Agency of Somerville, or CAS. And I'm going to share a bit about that in remarks, but just please know that I'm here solely representing myself. But like many of the housing justice organizers on this call, we're on the ground educating, organizing, and building power with Somerville residents across the city, but particularly focusing on working class and low-income renters who are increasingly becoming a displaced class. So many of these families are individuals or people of color, immigrants with and without papers, people with disabilities, living with young children and elders, and working in the cash or low-wage economy. And these households are still in crisis and haven't reaped any of the benefits of the economic, health, or social recovery through the pandemic. So we've been determined to reach these tenants and stabilize their housing. But then through this process, we built trusting, empowered relationships that's led many of these tenants to embrace their role as community leaders. As one example of this, we successfully organized an extension of the City of Somerville's eviction and foreclosure moratorium, which was originally slated to end on November 30th, but is now in place until April 30th, 2022, and is one of the last remaining moratoriums in Massachusetts. And this policy protection has been a critical stopgap for tenants who haven't been able to pay their full rent, and especially when the state and federal moratoria were struck down. It's pretty unconscionable that our federal government and state legislature have not done more for tenant protections, Mike and our allies aside on this call, during this pandemic and in the third variant surge, but we refuse to let that happen in our city. And but quite frankly, Somerville should be the norm for these types of policies, not the exception. Some of the other organizing we're doing is to prevent the eviction and displacement of residents through building sales, condo conversions, and other development-related situations, like Mike mentioned. So with the Green Line extension about to open, we're really worried that we're going to face more situations like that at 109 Walnut Street, which is in the heart of Somerville's Gilman Square. Tenants there received no-fault evictions after their building was sold in September without any notice. And then the new developer is tripling rents, which is way out of reach for these working class immigrant families. And we're currently organizing with one household who wishes to remain and secure a new lease. And as Mike mentioned, A week ago, we were able to secure her a temporary victory because the eviction notice was retracted. And I thank many of you in this room tonight who've been part of Vanessa's campaign. However, our organizing to stop these evictions is working for some households in some buildings, but there's not enough of us to stop this displacement crisis piece by piece because it stems from deep systemic inequality. Situations like Vanessa's should not become the norm or viewed as inevitable in cities like Somerville, Cambridge, and Boston, or anywhere. Evictions, displacement, and the lack of housing for all is because those with political power have allowed this type of violence. So the way we see it, we need bold policy solutions that address the core root of these problems. Stronger tenant protections, such as ending no-fault evictions and ensuring the right to counsel, enforcement of fair housing laws to improve protections from discrimination, and the decommodification of housing into community land trusts and social housing models for permanent affordability, just for starters. And housing as a public good, just like what Rep. Elugardo stated. So a radical redistribution of wealth is the path that we can and must take to make this possible. So I'm so eager to continue partnering with Rep. Mike Connolly and all of you at this event who truly believe that housing is a human right and can indeed be a guarantee for all. A housing campaign and a movement that's rooted in justice, humanity, and dignity for all, not just simply percentages and numerical thresholds. And I'm really ready to organize with anyone who wants to make this vision a reality for residents here, across our Commonwealth, and across the country. So thank you again, Mike, and let's do this.
Thank you, Nicole. Thank you for all the work you're doing. Next, we're going to hear from Somerville City Councilor from Ward 3, Ben Ewan Campen, who has just been an absolute progressive champion and a great friend and supporter of mine. I actually had the honor of officiating Ben and Alex's wedding. So thank you for that, Ben, and thanks for everything. Let's hear from Councilor Ewan Campen.
Thank you, Mike, and thank you everybody for being here. It's such it's so inspiring to be with all of you. It's particularly great to see so many of my colleagues from the Somerville City Council here. You know, I think as a city councilor, I'm kind of stuck at the same time being incredibly proud of all the work that we have done at the municipal level that Mayor Curtatone spoke about. I'm really proud of the housing agenda that we've passed. And at the same time, I think it's really important for all of us to be honest with ourselves and with our constituents about the fact that all of the real solutions that our constituents need to keep them in their houses, they all run through the State House. And I think this is never to kind of shrug off responsibility. We obviously can never take our foot off the gas at the local level. There is a lot that we do need to do. But we need to be really clear-eyed and strategic and honest with ourselves about where our energy needs to be directed for that long-term goal. And I'm so glad that I'm speaking after Nicole. So this is a situation, and I just want to give one example. So we have a real estate investment company. They bought a 6-unit building in Somerville. Happens all the time. 4 of those units had tenants in them, longtime tenants, immigrant families. And they're just kicking them all out, one after the other. They're doing it basically by raising the rent, almost tripling it in some cases. And it is just an utterly heartbreaking situation to be in as a city councilor, to hear from these constituents and basically to have to tell them there is basically nothing we can do from a legal perspective. There is no law that we can pass in Somerville. We are trapped by state law from doing anything that would really get to the heart of what those issues are. And so if you think about what are those policies that we do need to keep these people from being just priced out, we currently have a legal system that's set up basically to support and defend the developers who are doing this in the first place. So what are those policies? For one thing, just cause eviction. You shouldn't be able to kick people out of their house for nothing more than you want to raise the rent on them and they can't pay. Obviously, rent control. But as has been mentioned before, tenants' right to purchase. These tenants should have had the opportunity to partner with a nonprofit and buy this building in the first place, and a transfer fee so that there's a big pot of money so that they could do that. And I'm just, it is always inspiring to know that, you know, take a list of those policies and the other ones that we've heard about tonight. Mike is been leading on those since day one. It's very easy to take for granted that we have someone like Mike who, whenever there's a Mike event, it's going to be about housing. It's easy to take that for granted. But when you actually look at the output of Beacon Hill on housing justice legislation, it's very clear that we cannot take that for granted. So thank you, Mike. Thank you, everybody, for being here. And I'm sure I speak on behalf of all my colleagues here. We are with you in this and very much looking forward to next term. Thank you.
Thank you, Counselor. Thank you for all that you do. So we're at 7:30. I'm going to recognize, thank you for that once again. I'm going to recognize the folks who we had confirmed as speakers, and they've waited to speak. I want to make sure we hear from them, and then I think we'll wrap it up. So without further ado, Quentin Zondervan has just been really the progressive rock of the Cambridge City Council, if I say so myself. And he's someone who, when I first got into politics and was trying to challenge the establishment, on day one, Quentin said, yeah, give me your lawn sign, put it in my yard, I'll be with you. This was like a decade ago, way before I had any idea what I was doing. So thank you for your leadership, Quentin. I would love to hear your perspective on our conversation.
Thanks so much, Mike. Such a great honor to be here and just really enjoying the richness of this conversation. And thank you so much for all of your great work. Just wanted to give people a very quick, brief overview of some of the things going on in Cambridge related to housing. And I want to especially acknowledge my constituent and friend, Bill Lewis, who's trying to keep us honest. Like, hey, look, this is all great stuff, but there's people sleeping in the streets right now. So we got to get busy. So a couple of things I want to highlight in Cambridge with COVID. Of course, we had a lot of challenges with protecting people who are unhoused. And we were able to, through the advocacy of myself and Councilor Jeevan Sabrina Wheeler, we were able to create 2 new non-congregate shelters in Cambridge. And, those are going to last past this pandemic effort. So I'm really excited. I think we need to do a lot. We need to apply ARPA funding towards this purpose. Really continue to produce affordable housing that is low barrier, non-congregate, and that makes it easier for people to get off the street. We're also doing a lot of work on the HART proposal. This is an alternative public safety response, unarmed, led by the community, particularly the Black response in Cambridge. And that effort is also going to help in the longer term make life easier for everyone in our community, especially the unhoused. And then the last thing I want to highlight is that I did get a $5 housing bond through the city council and on the manager's desk in this term that just ended. And that was supported by the mayor. We got support on the council. And we managed to fund that over the next 10 years. Really doing some of the issues that are from we heard some of that to the history that we're seeing him as well. So those are a couple of things. Obviously, we're just super excited to support your bills, Mike and Nika and everyone who's really fighting for tenant protections at the State House, and count on me to be there to give testimony in the council and to just do whatever I can, whatever we can here in Cambridge to support this important effort that you guys are pushing. You know, we can't do it without your leadership at the state level, and at the same time, you need our local support at the city level. So we're all working hand in hand together here, and just really, really deeply appreciate your work. So thank you so much, Mike, and everyone.
Well, thank you, Quentin, and yeah, looking forward to supporting you on the city level, and looking forward to having your voice amplify what we're trying to do. Thank you so much. So I believe there are 3 confirmed speakers, people who had been invited to speak and have stuck with us. So I want to make sure we hear at least from them. Next is my constituent and a great leader in Somerville. She founded Just Us Somerville in the wake of the George Floyd murder. And she's been a public school teacher in my district in Cambridge. She lives in East Somerville. She's taught in East Cambridge for decades. And I'm so grateful for her support of our housing agenda as well. And I'm talking about Tracy Pratt. Thanks for joining us, Tracy.
All right. Well, thank you so much, first of all, Mike, for inviting me to speak. I want to say congratulations for holding this event and for it to be such a success during a holiday week. So just wrapping everything up, I want to say into 60 seconds, there's not a lot that I can add to what all of the great speakers have already said this evening, but I do want to let people know I moved here in 2004. And when I moved here, I rented a very small basement apartment in Cambridge, Massachusetts. I rented from a family who they didn't really want to be renters, but they just wanted to be able to help and support. So I was charged well below market rate. All utilities were included. My apartment was clean. It was nice. They wanted to make sure that I was taken care of, sometimes even before they were taken care of. And it wasn't because of laws and bills. I remember when in 2004, people said, you must want to have one of the last rent control apartments. And I did not. I just had a caring family. And this is what we really need is community. We need community to really care about its fellow members to make this work. But wouldn't it be awesome if homeowners who are able to rent their, whether it's a basement or an apartment unit, could actually have some incentive for being able to rent in that manner to take care of people in the community. That rental is what allowed me to own a home now, because I do own a condo. I've been in Somerville for 11 years and I've owned my home, but I would not have been able to own it if I didn't have affordable, stable rent, which I know this is what Mike is trying to do. I know this is what so many other elected officials are trying to do. So let's really get to it. And also remember, it's important for us to think about reparations in terms of when we're thinking about laws and policies, we need laws of policy and policies that are going to undo the damage that has been done for hundreds of years to people of color. Thank you.
Well, thank you for that, Tracy, and wholeheartedly agree that it's so powerful. And folks, I mean, let's hear it. I think all of these organizers you've heard from are actual constituents of the 26th Middlesex District. And I think it really speaks to the incredible values of our district. And I'm joined by so many constituents on this call. We literally could talk all night. But moving along to the final 2 confirmed speakers, and I'm sorry I made you wait, Farhan. I'm sorry, there've been so many elected officials who we haven't even been able to get into our way overtime program. It's amazing that there's 70 people on this call 40 minutes after it had been promised to end. So it really speaks to who here is just so committed to these issues. But really excited for our new city councilor-elect who ran on an unabashed housing platform across the spectrum of housing policies. Looking forward to your perspective and your voice. I remember you sat down with me in an MIT dorm room like 3 years ago. And so it's amazing to think from that somewhat inauspicious start that you've rocketed into the council already. So congratulations and welcome, City Councilor-elect Burhan Azim.
Thank you so much, Mike. And I'm happy to be here. My name is City Councilor-elect Burhan Azim for Cambridge, starting the term on January 3rd, hopefully. I wanted to thank you all for being here. As someone who grew up with a lot of housing security and in really deep poverty, like on food stamps, on Medicaid, jumping house to house, like we lived in another family's basement, and I skipped pre-K and kindergarten because we were afraid of getting caught by the landlord because there was too many people in that building. We would hide in the closet, whenever they came over. Housing policy matters a lot to me. And so I think it really speaks a lot of Mike that he needed a fundraiser at the end of the year. And he was like, you know what we're going to do? We're going to make it a talk show about housing policy. And so I think we're really lucky to have Mike as our state rep in Cambridge. And I'll be donating after this and, supporting Mike as, we all should. And I was going to say just another story was that when Mike started, he was like, when I was an activist, I saw, Senator Eldridge come and speak to me, and that was really motivating. And even before, I got to meet Mike 3 years ago, I had seen him all over the time around like fossil free and the Volpe rezoning. And so Mike was that for me. I had no idea what politics was. I was just like a lucky kid that got a full scholarship to MIT. And then I saw Mike coming to all of these events, and that was really a source of inspiration. I think he was the first elected official I ever actually met. And so it just means the world to me. And I love how he focuses on everything. Like production is a piece of it, making sure that we have enough housing for everyone, but also making sure to decouple that because, we don't want things like the new Green Line extension or bike lanes to feel like people that it's going to lead to price increases. We need to make sure that people have stable housing, that we have all of the tenant protections, the right to legal counsel, which Councillor Zondervan talked about, we're working on in Cambridge, on eviction ceiling, making sure that, one mistake doesn't hold you up. And like these are all things that exist in every other sector, right? Like if you can't pay your grocery bills, no one's going to hold that against you next week. But for in housing, we don't have these basic protections. And then just one or two things I just wanted to say were like on real estate transfer fees, which I know we haven't talked too much about. It's just a sales tax for housing. And I think that it makes so much sense in everything else. There's no reason that we shouldn't do it for housing sales that are, large and expensive. And that's something I'm a huge supporter of. And I'm so excited on rent stabilization. I think Representative Connolly's been pushing for it, and you can feel the momentum because, we're going to get a new governor and it's so possible. I'm so excited for this. And I really think that we have the opportunity to change the landscape over the next 2 years. And so I'll be supporting Rep. Connolly, and I'll hope that all of you guys will as well. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you so much, Councilor-elect. I never realized I was like the first person in elected office that you met. So that's a humbling story. It kind of shows, the chain of, I saw Jamie Eldridge and that inspired me, and, and you're going to pay it forward, hopefully to the next housing justice leader. So next, our last confirmed speaker, and then what I'm going to do is any of the electeds who have hung on the call, and let's shout them out. People like Patty Nolan, JT Scott, Jake Wilson, and others. If you've hung on the call and you're in elected office, I feel like I should at the very least let you say hello, and then we're going to call this. And again, this was my end of year fundraiser. I just took a quick look at my Act Blue, and I took a quick look at my Nation Builder, and contributions have been rolling in throughout the program. And I think a lot of elected officials would be like, are you out of your mind trying to take one of the most divisive, complicated issues there is, and then deciding to announce that you'll have a fundraising event where you're just going to try to talk about this issue. But again, it's really what I've wanted to do. What I wanted to do this evening was talk about housing. And those of you who know me know that that's how I feel pretty much every day. It's something that I want to fight and win. Until way back an hour and a half ago when I was showing you those slides, I really want us collectively to get to that point where we just say, you know what, you're a human being, you're in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, therefore, the government is responsible for ensuring that you can be housed, with dignity and with justice. And so that's a great segue to Jim, who's our last confirmed speaker. Then we're going to have a quick hello from any of the electeds who have stuck it out. Thank you for that, Councillor Nolan, and others. But Jim and I have been in touch, and I've always been really looking to him for his expertise and his leadership. And we're talking a lot. We were talking just the other day about Mass and Cass. And, I was lamenting to him that Mass and Cass gets all these headlines as if Mass and Cass is the problem, when we know that the problem is systemic. The problem is poverty. The problem is austerity. The problem is mental health care. The problem is substance use. The problem is the need for low threshold housing first policies and wraparound services. And those problems are not Mass and Cass problems. Those problems are in every single community in the Commonwealth. And I think if we talk about it that way, it could actually help us build the momentum we need to solve those problems. So sorry for the soliloquy, but I was just inspired in introducing Jim and thanking you for sticking on the call this long to share some perspectives with us.
Thank you, Mike. Can you hear me okay? Great. Well, as you know, my wife and I have been huge fans of yours since we first met you and saw your work at Occupy, and we've stuck with you since then because you've stuck with the people since then. So just briefly for context, I became a community psychiatrist here in the Boston area in the early 1990s. I completed my residency training in 1994. And so my medical career has coincided with the end of rent control and its consequences. And my personal journey has taken me from Somerville Mental Health Clinic off College Ave on Hall Avenue in the 1990s to Cambridge Health Alliance and the Central Street Clinic, working there in outpatient counseling and addictions, to most recently the Boston Healthcare for the Homeless program, where I have the honor of serving as the HIV team psychiatrist. I want to speak to one pretty specific issue, and that is the widespread myth that people become homeless because of substance use or mental health problems. I think one reason this myth is so tenacious is that unconsciously or otherwise, it suggests that unhoused people deserve their terrible circumstances. But the reality is a lot more complicated, and it includes the fact that many people develop serious problems with addiction and mental illness only after becoming homeless. In fact, studies looking at actual real-life temporal sequences reveal that for many people, homelessness precedes serious substance use and precedes the development of serious mental health problems. So we can say that in many cases where the diagnosis seems to be PTSD or schizophrenia or opioid or methamphetamine dependence, the actual diagnosis, the underlying cause is homelessness. And many of my medical colleagues recognize this, and more of us agree that the best medicine we can prescribe is safe, stable housing. That doesn't replace counseling or psychiatric treatment where needed, or recovery services certainly, but it needs to be there first, housing first. Thanks, Mike, and thanks to everybody else on the call.
Well, thank you so much, Jim, and thank you for really sharing all that. And I hope in the new year, I was rather ambitious with that slideshow. But hopefully you all saw that one of the things I really am hoping we can collectively do in the new year, and I think it will take probably a full year, is to try to figure out what would that policy look like on Beacon Hill to fund and support the broad set of programs that would truly address these issues. And we'll be looking to you and to so many people who joined us this evening to really get that input. is that, I think, is that all of our confirmed speakers? Was anyone else asked to speak who wasn't invited to? I don't think so. Thank you for that. Again, this is officially my end of year fundraiser. And just to again explain, I currently have yet to hire staff to do political organizing or support my reelection. And so your contributions this evening, and I know so many of you have already contributed, that's what that funding will do. So that hopefully next time when we gather people to have this conversation, we'll have twice as many people in the room, and there'll actually be more folks organizing it, because it's a lot to organize between the presentation, the Zoom, et cetera, et cetera. So thank you for that support. I now want to just invite the elected officials who have stuck with us throughout this. I see Councilor-elect Patty Nolan, Councilor Patty Nolan, Councilor-elect Jake Wilson, Councilor JT Scott, and Councilor Jesse Klingon. So I'll start with Councilor Nolan. Would love for you to just say hello. And thank you for sticking this out and for being attuned to this conversation.
It's amazing, Mike. Not only am I glad I stuck it out, I learned a lot, and it's always great to hear your presentations from all these other people. I also want to remind all of us, it was really important you brought so many voices into the room. So to hear particularly Jim's at the end about how the stigmatization of people who are homeless allows people to then not want to house them, it's just such an important part of the conversation that doesn't always happen. And I will say, just on the transfer tax, I don't know about commercial rent control, but what we need is a transfer tax on commercial real estate, because particularly in Cambridge, I think right now it's still, as I understand, having gone to a couple meetings, mostly applied to residential homes. If we could get it for commercial in Cambridge, that would raise tens of millions more dollars. Anyway, I look forward to continuing this conversation. Don't want to take up more time, but I am so thrilled for your leadership, Mike, and for every single other person in the electeds on this who have pushed forward with agendas that we also desperately need. Housing for all is what we need, just like healthcare for all.
Well, thank you for that. I'm so grateful for everything that you do, Councilor, from the school committee to the city council, and I appreciate you being here. You know, I often talk about the politics of addition. How do we add more people to the conversation? Because that's how we will pass policy. And I know you value that as well. And I'm just grateful for your service. Next, I want to turn to Ward 2, Somerville, and the great city councilor who I've been so proud to support throughout his career, and he has supported me throughout my service. And I'm talking about City Councilor JT Scott. Thank you for sticking with this. I know we've run way over, but I'm grateful for you. Thanks for being here.
No, I'm grateful to be here, and I'm going to keep it short. Jim Recht, I hope you're not leaving quite yet, because I wanted to thank you for those words. I also wanted to lift up Nicole to say thank you for the history lesson we got here. This is a great event, which brings people into the history of this. But also, I want to lift up that point about this being a housing first solution to a great many of the problems that we face. And these are intersectional problems, as was talked about at the top 2 hours ago. You know, in Portland, Oregon, only 2% of their homeless or their population is houseless. And that 2% accounts for over half of the arrests that happen in that city. And so when we look at how we're going to address the problems that we face as a society, I think the over-reliance on policing as an avenue to just remove people from view is over and over seen, as it was a mass and cast, as it is everywhere in the country, as a serious flaw. And so I'm really grateful for this leadership. I'm really grateful to see so many fellow electeds getting behind a housing first policy here, because I think these things are not unrelated. I think this is how we move to a more equitable society. This is exactly what we have to do to not just take care of those most vulnerable members, but to take care of everybody in our society, because none of us are safe until all of us are safe. Councilor Ewan-Campen said it really well about it being a heartbreaking situation when people are being evicted simply due to the fact that somebody wants to make more money on a property. And I really appreciate the commitment of everybody here tonight and your commitment over the years to pushing to a society and laws, legislation and policy that we can change that. So thank you, Mike. You know, I got your back, even though with the lines redrawn, I'm not your constituent anymore. Sad to say, let's check in again in 10 years. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much, JT. And yeah, it's an honor to do this work with you and to share this partnership with you. So there's 2 more electeds. I'm going to let them say hello, and then I'm going to say good night and Happy New Year, and thank you for your support. And the next person I want to shout out is Somerville City Councilor from Ward 4. We've had a quorum of the Somerville City Council this evening. We could have passed some home rule petitions if we had thought of it. I'm only kidding. But I want to shout out, I call him Mr. Somerville. I don't know. I just think of you as someone who your heart and soul is the people of Somerville, in particular, the work you've done on addressing the issue of addiction, on addressing issues facing the unhoused community, working with me and others to bring road safety improvements to Route 38, Route 28, and so many other things. Thank you, Jesse, for being a friend and being a great progressive champ.
Yeah, thank you. Thank Mike. No, thank you for being the champion that we need up on Beacon Hill. Just being a courageous leader is you know, it just kind of solidifies our work together down at the municipal level. We need people like you up on Beacon Hill. Thank you for recognizing some of the things I've done. You know, I like to say, as far as the addiction stuff, it was, you know, certainly it's something that's hit close to home growing up in Somerville, but also, you know, around that time frame, 2014, the pandemic was raging, and actually, it's sadly with fentanyl, it's the #1. It's actually killing more people than anything right now. But to your point about housing and in this particular event, that's something that has always been my fight since, you know, growing up in Somerville. As you know, I've moved at least 7 or 8 times, sometimes for bad landlords, sometimes for non-payment of rent. You know, my mom struggled to get by, so I know this fight all too well. My mom fought for rent control back in the 80s. And, you know, this is something she passed down to me. I mean, she literally fought her way out of Somerville, you know, with breast cancer, as a DCF foster parent, 2 other children who were in the system, as you know, when you were in the system. Irregardless, she just, you know, she fought her whole way and ultimately ended up, you know, being displaced to Charlestown in housing, where she ultimately passed on from breast cancer, but not without leaving a legacy of me and so many others who have watched her fight. And this is all of our fight. And housing stability is the #1 issue. I was dealing with some folks today who are having to move out. It's, you know, the 31st is coming, and some of my constituents in Mystic View having some problems with moving. So this is something that's just on a daily basis, every day, constantly. And, you know, I'll just leave with this. If we could have only been here, you know, 20, 25 years ago, when the gentrification really started to roll in. But nonetheless, we're here now. People like myself, Matt McLaughlin, JT, all the folks that have been on this call and on this at this event, including yourself. So hopefully we can, you know, start to claw back some of the, you know, claw back, but also stabilize people's lives who depend on stable housing, and that's, you know, that's our job. That's what we do. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Jesse, and thank you for sharing, you know, your personal story. And I know, you know, that speaks to really what grounds you in this work and why you fight the way you do. And I'm so grateful for you. And last but not least, I want to just invite Councilor-elect Jake Wilson to say a quick hello. And then I will thank you all for joining us and look forward to continuing this work in the new year.
Thanks, Mike. I'm used to going last with a W last name. Hi, everyone. I'm Jake Wilson, and on January 3rd, I'll be getting sworn in as a city councilor at large here in Somerville after running in part on housing affordability and stability issues this year. I'm so thankful to have a progressive fighter in Mike advocating for sound housing policy on Beacon Hill. And I'm excited to work with him and the rest of our excellent state contingent on housing and so many other things. I'll end with this. I knocked a lot of doors and talked to a lot of voters this year. And when I pitched an idea of a very basic form of rent stabilization of just a basic cap, 7 or 8% on returning tenants, 0 people objected to that. 0 people. This is something that I think people will get behind. And I thank Mike and everyone for fighting for this.
All righty. Thank you so much. That's powerful, powerful testimony. And looking forward to you being sworn in next week. It's 8:01. You all are the hardcore champions and supporters who would stay an extra hour. So thank you for doing this, and look forward to working in partnership with all of you in the new year. Happy New Year and good night, everyone. And thank you, Frank Geritana, our treasurer, for helping support me in this. Good night.
Good night, Mike.